champagne glass was still in her hand when I found her. That's the detail that haunts me most. Not the chains, not the leather restraints bolted to the custom-built bed frame, not even the expression of absolute terror frozen on her face. It was that crystal champagne flute, still gripped in her left hand, the pale liquid spilled across silk sheets like scattered diamonds. Because champagne meant celebration. It meant trust. It meant she'd welcomed whoever killed her into that locked room. My name is Detective Sarah Chen, and I've worked homicide for 12 years in this city. I've seen bodies in dumpsters, in bathtubs, in cars compressed into cubes at junkyards. I've seen what humans do to each other when rage or greed or desperation takes over. But I'd never seen anything like what waited for me behind the locked door of the Ashworth mansion on that cold February morning. The call came at 4:17 a.m. Dispatch said it was a possible DOA at one of the old estates in Riverside Heights, the kind of neighborhood where houses have names instead of numbers, where gardeners work year-round maintaining hedges into geometric perfection, where secrets hide behind gates and privilege, and the kind of money that makes problems disappear. The responding officers had found something unusual, the dispatcher said, her voice tight, with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Something I needed to see for myself. When I arrived, there were already 5 patrol cars outside the Ashworth estate, their lights painting the pre-dawn darkness in shades of red and blue. The house loomed above us, Victorian Gothic with modern additions, the kind of architectural statement that screamed wealth and taste and careful curation. Officer Thompson met me at the gate, and I immediately knew something was wrong. Thompson was a veteran, 20 years on the force, the kind of cop who'd seen everything twice. But his hands were shaking as he handed me gloves and booties. "3rd floor," he said, his voice rough. "Master bedroom." Door was locked from the inside. Husband had to break it down. Victim? Melissa Ashworth, 34 years old. Married to Jonathan Ashworth, the real estate developer. No signs of forced entry, no sounds of struggle. But Detective... He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The scene is complicated." I'd learned just how complicated when I climbed those stairs. The mansion's interior was museum quality, original oil paintings, antique furniture, Persian rugs that probably cost more than my annual salary. But I barely noticed the opulence as Thompson led me up the curved staircase to the 3rd floor. The master bedroom was at the end of a long hallway, its door hanging off broken hinges, splinters of expensive mahogany scattered across plush carpeting. Jonathan Ashworth sat on a bench outside the room, still in his pajamas, his hands covered in blood from breaking down the door. He was a large man, mid-40s, with the kind of build that came from expensive personal trainers and careful nutrition. When he looked up at me, I saw something I'd recognize anywhere. The particular species of shock that comes from discovering your entire life was a lie. "I couldn't get in," he whispered. "She always locked it. She said she needed privacy. I respected that. I respected her boundaries. But this morning, something felt wrong. I knocked. No answer. I called her phone. I could hear it ringing inside. And then I smelled..." He couldn't finish. I nodded to Thompson and stepped into the room. The smell hit me first. Death, unmistakable, but also something else. Expensive perfume, scented candles, leather. The bedroom was massive, easily 400 square feet, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's grounds. But the windows were sealed shut. I could see that immediately. painted over probably years ago with decorative iron bars on the outside. The only entrance was the door Jonathan had destroyed, and in the center of the room, on that four-poster bed draped in crimson silk, lay Melissa Ashworth. She wore a black corset, expensive lingerie, heels. The champagne glass was in her left hand. Her right hand was secured to the bedpost with a padded leather cuff, professional grade, the kind used in high-end BDSM. But it was her throat that told the story. Bruised, crushed. The marks are clearly visible even from across the room. Someone had strangled her, taken their time doing it, and then carefully arranged her body in a pose of twisted elegance. The medical examiner would later confirm she'd been dead approximately 8 hours. Strangled manually, probably, by someone with large hands, strong grip. Time of death between 8 p.m. and midnight the previous night. But that timeline created an impossible problem. Because according to Jonathan Ashworth, his wife had locked herself in that bedroom at 7 p.m., like she did every Tuesday and Friday evening. He'd heard the deadbolt click from his study down the hall. He'd been on a conference call with investors in Tokyo from 7:30 until nearly midnight. His assistant and 3 other witnesses confirming he'd never left the video frame. The house security system showed no one entering or exiting the property between 7 p.m. and 4 a.m. when Jonathan broke down the door. And that bedroom had only one entrance, the door he'd shattered, and windows that were permanently sealed. So how did the killer get in? And more importantly, how did they get out? I stood in that impossible room, surrounded by evidence of a secret life. The restraints, the toys, the elaborate setup that suggested Melissa Ashworth had been exploring realms her husband clearly knew nothing about. And I felt the case hook into me like a barb. This wasn't just murder. This was a puzzle designed to humiliate, to expose, to destroy. Someone had killed Melissa Ashworth in her most private space, during her most vulnerable moments, and they'd done it in a way that seemed to defy the laws of physics. And I was going to figure out how. Listen, if you want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes, you need to subscribe right now. Because what I discovered in that locked room changed everything I thought I knew about trust, marriage, and the masks people wear. And if you've ever wondered what your partner does when you're not watching, you owe it to yourself to share this story. Do it now, before you forget. Before the algorithm buries this and you never find out the truth. The crime scene team arrived as dawn broke, transforming that bedroom into a cathedral of scientific inquiry. Cameras flashed, evidence bags filled with items I'd need a glossary to identify. Tech specialists dusted for prints, swabbed for DNA, documented every angle of that impossible scene. But I focused on what wasn't there. No signs of struggle beyond the bruising on Melissa's throat. No defensive wounds on her hands. The one that wasn't cuffed showed no broken nails, no skin under the nails. Nothing that suggested she'd fought back. The champagne glass suggested she'd been drinking with her killer. The unlocked cuff on the bedpost suggested she'd secured herself, voluntarily, expecting someone she trusted. Detective Chen? One of the techs called me over to the nightstand. You should see this. In the drawer was a phone. Not Melissa's regular phone. We'd found that on the bed, password protected, already bagged for analysis. This was a second phone, a burner, cheap and prepaid. The tech had powered it on with gloved hands, and the screen showed dozens of text messages between Melissa and someone saved simply as M. I scrolled through them, my stomach tightening with each message. They were explicit, detailed, chronicling a relationship that had been building for months. M and Melissa had been meeting regularly, playing out elaborate scenarios, building trust through careful negotiation of boundaries and desires. And last night was supposed to be special. An anniversary of sorts, the messages said. 6 months since their first scene together. The last text was from M, sent at 7:43 p.m. "On my way. Tonight will be unforgettable. Trust me." Melissa had replied, "I trust you with everything." 20 minutes later, she was dead. I looked at Jonathan Ashworth through the broken doorway. He was still sitting on that bench, still covered in his wife's blood from trying to revive her after he'd broken in. A man married to a woman for 8 years, sharing a home, sharing a life. And he'd had no idea she was living a completely separate existence 20 feet down the hall. "Mr. Ashworth," I said, stepping into the hallway, "did your wife ever mention anyone with the initial M?" He looked up, confused. "M? Like Mary? Michael? Anyone she was close to? Anyone she met with regularly?" Melissa had friends, colleagues from her charity work, but no one particularly close. She was private, independent. I respected that about her. Private. The word everyone uses when they mean secretive. "When did your wife start locking her bedroom?" Jonathan's face colored slightly. "About 6 months ago. We'd been having difficulties. The marriage was strained. We agreed to separate bedrooms temporarily while we worked things out in therapy." Melissa said she needed space to process, to heal. The locked door was part of her boundary setting. 6 months. The exact timeline of her relationship with M. "Did you know about your wife's interest in BDSM?" The question landed like a physical blow. Jonathan's face went white, then red, then white again. She never... We didn't... Mr. Ashworth, your wife's bedroom is equipped with professional-grade bondage furniture and equipment. This wasn't casual exploration. This was a significant part of her life. You're telling me you had no knowledge of it? I never went in there. The words exploded from him, loud enough that officers down the hall turned to look. She locked the door. I respected her privacy. I didn't pry, didn't snoop, didn't violate her boundaries. That's what you're supposed to do in a healthy relationship. Trust your partner. But trust, I was learning, was just another word for willful blindness. I spent the next 6 hours building Melissa Ashworth's public profile. On paper, she was perfect. Philanthropist, arts patron, board member of 3 charitable organizations. She'd come from old money, married Jonathan fresh out of college, dedicated herself to worthy causes and social obligations. Her Instagram showed gallery openings, charity galas, carefully curated glimpses of a life lived in the public eye. But that second phone told a different story. By noon, our tech team had cracked both phones and painted a picture of a woman living in 2 worlds. Her primary phone was all surface: calendar appointments, work emails, family photos. But the burner phone revealed someone else entirely. Someone exploring desires she'd kept hidden. Someone building an intense relationship with a person she called M. The messages went back exactly 6 months, starting tentatively, growing bolder. M was patient, educational, careful about consent and boundaries. They'd met at a private club called Sanctuary, the messages revealed. They'd negotiated scenes, discussed limits, built trust slowly. And Melissa had embraced this new aspect of herself with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a missing piece of their identity. But then 3 weeks ago, the tone of the messages changed. Melissa, I think we should slow down. This is getting complicated. M, complicated how? Melissa, I'm starting to have feelings, real feelings. This was supposed to be just physical. M, feelings aren't weakness. They're part of what makes this beautiful. Melissa, but I'm married. I have obligations. I can't just... M, can't what? Be happy? Be yourself? You've spent your whole life being what everyone else needs. When do you get to choose? And then 2 days ago, a message that made my blood run cold. Melissa, we need to talk. I found something. Something about you that you've been hiding. M, what are you talking about? Melissa, I know who you really are. I know what you did. We need to end this. M, please don't make any decisions when you're upset. Let's meet tomorrow, Tuesday like usual. I can explain everything. Melissa, fine, but this is the last time. The last time she'd been right about that. I leaned back in my desk chair, staring at the evidence board I'd started building. Photos of the crime scene, timeline of events, lists of people in Melissa's life. And at the center, one question written in red marker: who is M? Chapter 1. The Sanctuary Club didn't advertise. It didn't have a website, didn't show up on Google Maps, didn't exist in any public directory. But every city has places like this. Private establishments that cater to specific communities, operating in legal gray areas known only to those who need to know. Finding it took 3 hours of working my contacts in Vice, calling in favors, making promises I'd probably regret. But by 8 p.m. that evening, I was standing outside an unmarked door in the warehouse district, pressing a buzzer and waiting to be admitted to Melissa Ashworth's secret world. The woman who answered was in her 50s, elegant, with the kind of presence that commanded respect without demanding it. She introduced herself as Kathleen, the club's owner and manager. "I've been expecting you," she said, leading me through a tastefully decorated entrance hall. "Melissa's death has been all over the news. I knew it was only a matter of time before the police found their way here." "You knew her well?" "Well enough." She'd been a member for about 7 months. Started attending our newcomer orientation sessions, asking questions, learning about the lifestyle. She was cautious at first, nervous, but she bloomed once she found the right partner. "M?" Kathleen's expression flickered. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "You know about Morgan?" "Morgan." Finally, a full name. "Tell me about them." Kathleen led me to a private office, richly appointed with leather furniture and dim lighting. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking, handed me one, and settled into a chair with the weight of someone preparing to betray a confidence. Morgan Reeves, 41 years old. Been part of the community for 15 years. Highly respected, known for being ethical and careful. Morgan and Melissa met at one of our educational events 6 months ago, and they started negotiating a dynamic, dominant and submissive, and it developed into something deeper. Romantic? These relationships often blur lines. What starts as a negotiated power exchange can become emotional intimacy. Melissa and Morgan certainly developed feelings for each other. Did Morgan ever seem violent? Dangerous? Kathleen set her glass down carefully. "Detective, you need to understand something about this community. Consensual BDSM is built on trust, communication, and strict adherence to boundaries. People who violate consent are immediately removed. Morgan has been a member here for over a decade without a single complaint, a single boundary violation, a single red flag. People hide things. Not in this community, not successfully. We're hypervigilant about safety because we have to be. Morgan Reeves is one of the most conscientious dominants I've ever known. And yet, Melissa Ashworth is dead, killed during what appears to be a BDSM scene in a locked room Morgan presumably had access to. Kathleen was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a folder. This is Morgan's membership file. Contact information, references, scene negotiation templates, everything you need to find them. But detective, I'm telling you, you're looking in the wrong direction. What makes you say that? Because 2 days ago, Morgan came to me in tears. Said Melissa had discovered something about their past that changed everything. Said Melissa wanted to end the relationship. Morgan was devastated but respected her choice. Was planning to say goodbye last night, to close things properly. Morgan isn't a killer. Morgan's a person in love who just lost everything. I took the folder, studied the address, the contact details, the photo of a person with kind eyes and an open face. I'll need to speak with Morgan tonight. I expected nothing less. Kathleen walked me to the door, then paused. Detective, one more thing. Melissa came to see me 3 days ago. She asked about our member vetting process, about how thoroughly we background check people. She seemed worried, paranoid almost. Said she needed to know if we'd missed something. Missed what? She wouldn't say, just asked me to pull Morgan's application from 15 years ago when they first joined. I gave her a copy. She took it and left. That was the last time I saw her alive. The pieces were clicking together, but the picture they formed made no sense. Melissa had discovered something in Morgan's background that had shaken her badly enough to end their relationship. But what? And how did it lead to murder in an impossible locked room? I had Morgan Reeves's address. It was time to get answers. Chapter 2. Morgan Reeves lived in a converted loft in the Arts District, the kind of industrial space with exposed brick and high ceilings that cost a fortune while pretending to be bohemian. I brought backup Officer Rodriguez, young but sharp, good instincts. We arrived at 10 p.m., warrant in hand, prepared for resistance. But when Morgan answered the door, there was no resistance, just tears. "I've been waiting for you," Morgan said, stepping aside to let us in. "I knew she was dead. I felt it, and I knew you'd think I did it." The loft was immaculate, organized, filled with books and art and the kind of carefully curated aesthetic that spoke of someone who valued beauty and order. Morgan offered us tea, sat us down at a dining table made from reclaimed wood, and started talking before I could begin the interrogation. "I loved her," Morgan said simply. "Melissa was extraordinary. Brilliant, kind, wounded in ways she'd never acknowledged. She came to me seeking something she couldn't name, and we built something beautiful together. And then 3 weeks ago, she found the article." "What article?" Morgan pulled out a laptop, opened a browser, showed me a news story from 15 years earlier. The headline made my chest tighten. "Local woman found dead in apparent BDSM accident. Questions remain about partner's role." I read quickly. Samantha Price, age 29, found dead in her apartment. Asphyxiation during what appeared to be autoerotic activity, though her partner claimed they'd been engaged in consensual breath play. The partner had been investigated, cleared of wrongdoing, but the case had attracted media attention because of the BDSM angle. The partner's name was listed as Morgan Reeves. "You were investigated for murder before." I was cleared Morgan said firmly. Samantha's death was a tragedy, an accident. We'd negotiated the scene carefully, but something went wrong. I called 911 immediately, tried to revive her, cooperated fully with the investigation. The medical examiner ruled it accidental. The police cleared me, but the media made me into a monster. And Melissa discovered this. Someone sent her the article, anonymously. 3 weeks ago, it just appeared in her email with no message, no explanation, just the article, and she panicked. Why didn't you tell her about Samantha before you got involved? Morgan's face crumpled. Because I was ashamed. Because every time I tried to start a new relationship, that article followed me. People couldn't see past it, couldn't trust me. So with Melissa, I thought, maybe I could just be Morgan. Not Morgan who was investigated for murder. Just me. That's a significant secret to keep from someone. You're supposed to trust. I know it was wrong. And when Melissa found out, she was devastated. She said she couldn't trust me anymore. She said we had to end it. I begged her to let me explain, to give me one more chance to say goodbye properly. She agreed to meet last night, one final time. And you went to her house. No. Morgan's voice was firm. I didn't. Melissa wanted to meet at her home. But I said no. I told her it wasn't safe, that her husband might find out, that we should meet at a hotel like we usually did. She got angry, said I was trying to control her one last time. We argued over text. And then she stopped responding. I thought she changed her mind, decided not to meet. I spent last night here alone, drinking too much and crying. And this morning I saw the news. Rodriguez was taking notes. I studied Morgan's face, looking for tells, for the micro expressions that reveal lies, but all I saw was grief. I need to see your phone. All your communications with Melissa. Morgan handed it over without hesitation. I scrolled through the messages, found the conversation from last night. Just as Morgan said, an argument about where to meet. Morgan refusing to come to the house. Melissa's final message at 7:23 p.m. Fine, I'll do this alone. Goodbye, Morgan. No messages after that, no calls, nothing to suggest Morgan had gone to that house. Where were you between 7 p.m. and midnight last night? Here, alone, no alibi, I'm afraid. I turned off my phone because I couldn't stand to see Melissa's name. I drank a bottle of wine and fell asleep on the couch. Woke up to the news. It was plausible. But plausible didn't mean true. Morgan, I need you to come to the station. Answer some questions formally. We'll need your fingerprints, DNA, a complete timeline of your relationship with Melissa. Am I under arrest? Not yet. But you're a person of interest in an active murder investigation. You can cooperate voluntarily, or I can get a warrant. Morgan stood, grabbed a jacket. I'll cooperate. I have nothing to hide. Not anymore. As we drove to the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that Morgan was telling the truth. But if Morgan hadn't killed Melissa, who had? And how did they get into that locked room? The answer I would discover was more disturbing than I could have imagined. Chapter 3. Morgan Reeves spent 6 hours in interrogation, answering every question with painful honesty. About the BDSM lifestyle, about the relationship with Melissa, about Samantha Price's death 15 years ago. Every answer checked out. Every timeline aligned. Every detail matched the evidence we had. But there was still the locked room. The impossible physics of a murder that couldn't have happened the way it appeared to have happened. I left Morgan in a holding cell. Not under arrest, but not free to leave. and went back to the Ashworth mansion at 2 a.m. Sometimes crime scenes speak louder in the silence of deep night, when the chaos of investigation has cleared and you're alone with the evidence. The bedroom was still sealed with police tape, but I had access. I stood in the doorway, studying the space with fresh eyes. The broken door frame, the sealed windows, the four-poster bed, the champagne glass, now bagged as evidence, but still vivid in my memory. Someone had been in this room with Melissa Ashworth when she died. Someone she'd trusted enough to drink with, to secure herself for. Someone who'd strangled her and then vanished from a locked room. I walked to the windows, examined the seals. Painted shut years ago, probably before Melissa had even moved in. The bars on the outside were decorative wrought iron installed for security, spaced too closely for a person to fit through. No way out there. The door was the only entrance, solid mahogany, expensive deadbolt that locked from the inside with a key. We'd found Melissa's key on the nightstand. No other copies had been found anywhere in the house. Jonathan swore he'd never had one, but someone had gotten in and out. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to think like the killer. What did they know? What did they see? The ceiling. I sat up abruptly, looking more carefully at the ornate molding that ran around the room's perimeter. Victorian houses like this often had hidden features, servant passages, architectural quirks. I grabbed a chair, climbed up, started pressing and examining the molding near the corner, and found it. A seam, barely visible, painted over but still present. I pressed harder and a panel shifted slightly. "Rodriguez," I called, even though I'd come alone. I called the station instead, got the crime scene team back to the house within 20 minutes. By 3 a.m., we'd discovered what I'd missed on the first investigation. A crawl space, hidden above the bedroom ceiling, accessible through a panel disguised by the ornate molding. The space was narrow, dusty, clearly unused for decades. But there were fresh disturbances in the dust. Someone had been up there recently, and more disturbingly, there was evidence someone had been up there during the murder. Fiber evidence, a water bottle, and scratches on the wooden beams that suggested someone had gripped them tightly, waiting in silence. "The killer didn't escape," I said, realization dawning cold and terrible. "They were here the whole time, hidden in the ceiling while we processed the scene, and then they just walked out, later when the house was empty." My team looked at each other with the particular horror that comes from realizing we'd been played. We'd secured the scene, documented everything, left guards posted, but no one had thought to check the ceiling crawl space. Why would we? The murder appeared to be a locked room mystery. We were looking for how someone got in and out through doors and windows. We never thought to look up. "Pull all the security footage," I ordered. "Every camera within 3 blocks of this house. Someone left this property after we cleared the initial scene. Someone who knew we'd be so focused on the locked door that we'd never notice them walking out the front entrance. I need you to think about something, and I want you to comment below with your honest answer. Have you ever been so focused on the obvious explanation that you missed what was right in front of you? Because that's what this killer counted on. Our assumptions blinding us to the truth. Drop your answer in the comments. Your insight might help solve the next case. The security footage took 8 hours to compile and review. Cameras from the Ashworth estate, from neighboring properties, from traffic lights and businesses within a 6-block radius. We were looking for anyone leaving the Ashworth mansion after we'd sealed it as a crime scene, but before we'd posted overnight guards, and we found them. At 6:47 a.m., almost 3 hours after we'd cleared the initial investigation, a figure emerged from the Ashworth mansion's front entrance, wearing a black hoodie, jeans, face angled away from cameras. They walked calmly to a car parked 2 blocks away, got in, and drove off. The car was a silver Lexus. We ran the plates, registered to Jonathan Ashworth. "Bring him in," I told Rodriguez, "now." But when officers arrived at the Ashworth estate at noon, Jonathan was gone. His car was in the garage. The Lexus was one of 3 vehicles registered to the family. His phone went straight to voicemail. His assistant said he'd called in sick, said he needed time to grieve. Jonathan Ashworth had vanished. I stood in the mansion's grand foyer, the pieces finally clicking into place. The locked room had been a performance, a piece of misdirection designed to hide the obvious truth. Jonathan had killed his wife, hidden in the ceiling during our investigation, then walked out of his own house hours later when we'd shifted our focus elsewhere. But why? And how did he know about the crawl space? How did he know about Melissa's BDSM activities? How did he plan this so perfectly? The answer was in the house. I could feel it. I spent the next 6 hours searching Jonathan's study, his bedroom, his private spaces, looking for evidence of premeditation, of planning, of the careful architecture of murder. And in a locked drawer in his desk, I found it. A journal. Handwritten, dated entries going back 6 months. Jonathan Ashworth's private diary, chronicling the slow collapse of his marriage and the darkness growing in his heart. March 15th. Melissa locked her bedroom again tonight, says she needs privacy, but I can hear sounds sometimes late at night. What is she doing in there? April 3rd. Hired a private investigator. Need to know what my wife is hiding. The marriage may be over, but I deserve the truth. May 12th. PI delivered his report, photos, video, evidence of Melissa's affair, but it's not what I expected, not a traditional affair, something darker, stranger. She's involved with someone who... I can't even process this. June 8th. Confronted her. She denied everything, called me paranoid, controlling, said if I didn't trust her, maybe we should divorce. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should just let her go. But the prenup, divorce would cost me everything. July 22nd. Found the architectural plans for this house. Original blueprints from 1887. There's a servant passage above the master bedroom. Hidden access panel. I wonder if Melissa knows about it. August 15th. Tested the crawl space. Waited up there for 3 hours while Melissa was in her private time. Could see through cracks in the molding. Could hear everything. My God, what kind of woman did I marry? The entries grew darker, more obsessive, more detached from reality. Jonathan had been spying on his wife for months, watching her through cracks in the ceiling, documenting her secret life. And slowly, methodically, he'd built a plan. The final entry was dated the day before Melissa died. Tomorrow night, I'll be in the ceiling when her lover arrives. I'll wait until they're settled, until she's vulnerable. Then I'll drop down, end this, and disappear back into the crawl space. The locked room will baffle everyone. They'll blame her lover, or think it was autoerotic asphyxiation gone wrong. Either way, I'll be free. Free of this marriage. Free of her betrayal. Free. Except the lover never arrived. Morgan had refused to come, and Jonathan had killed Melissa anyway, alone in that locked room, carrying out his plan, even though the victim he'd really wanted, Morgan, wasn't there. I put out an APB on Jonathan Ashworth, airports, train stations, border crossings. Every officer in the city had his photo. We'd find him. But first, I needed to free the person we'd wrongly suspected. Chapter 4. Morgan Reeves looked small in the interrogation room, diminished by hours of questioning and the weight of being suspected of a murder they didn't commit. When I walked in and said, "You're free to go," the relief was so profound that Morgan actually collapsed. Head on the table, shoulders shaking with sobs. "We know who killed Melissa," I said quietly. "Her husband. He's been planning this for months. You were supposed to be framed for it." Morgan looked up, face blotchy with tears. "Jonathan?" But he seemed so detached. Melissa said they barely spoke. "He was watching her, watching both of you, spying through a hidden crawl space above the bedroom. He knew about your relationship, knew about the BDSM, knew you'd be the obvious suspect because of what happened to Samantha Price." Dear God. Morgan's voice was barely a whisper. All this time, while Melissa and I were building trust, her husband was up there in the ceiling planning to murder her and frame you for it. The locked room was designed to create confusion, to make it seem impossible. He counted on us focusing on you as the most likely suspect, the dominant partner, the person with a history, the one who'd been cleared once before. It was almost perfect. Almost. But Jonathan had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed we'd stop looking once we had an obvious suspect. He'd underestimated our thoroughness, our willingness to question the impossible. "I need to ask you something," Morgan said, standing on shaky legs. "The person who sent Melissa that article about Samantha, was it Jonathan?" I nodded. "We found the email on his computer. He sent it anonymously to drive a wedge between you, to ensure Melissa would push you away. He needed you separated, and needed her isolated and vulnerable. The article was part of his plan." Morgan's face hardened. "He took everything from me. Melissa and I could have worked through the Samantha situation. It was an accident, a terrible accident, but we could have built trust again. But he poisoned that possibility, and then he killed her. We'll find him," I promised. "He can't hide forever." But Jonathan Ashworth had money, resources, and a 2-day head start. Finding him wouldn't be easy. I was wrong about that, though. We found him less than 6 hours later. Or rather, he found us. Chapter 5. The call came at 7 p.m. from a security guard at Riverside Cemetery. A man matching Jonathan Ashworth's description had been spotted at a grave site, behaving erratically. When officers arrived, they found Jonathan sitting next to a headstone covered in dirt, talking to someone who wasn't there. The headstone read, "Samantha Price, beloved daughter, gone too soon." I arrived to find Jonathan in handcuffs, still mumbling incoherently. His expensive clothes were filthy, his hair wild, his eyes unfocused. The transformation from powerful real estate developer to broken man was complete. "Mr. Ashworth," I said carefully, "I'm Detective Chen. I need you to come with me." He looked at me, and for a moment, clarity returned to his eyes. "She knows," he whispered. "Samantha knows what I did. She won't forgive me. Samantha Price died 15 years ago. But she knows, don't you see? They're all connected. Melissa, Samantha, Morgan. It's all the same sin, replaying over and over. I tried to stop it. I tried to end the cycle. Paranoid delusion or genuine psychotic break? Either way, Jonathan Ashworth was confessing. We took him to the station, got him medical attention, and waited for his lawyer to arrive before formal questioning. But Jonathan wanted to talk, needed to talk. The words poured out of him in a rush of confession and justification and madness. "I discovered Melissa's affair 6 months ago," he said, his lawyer trying unsuccessfully to quiet him. "At first, I was just hurt, betrayed. But then I started investigating, learning about this world she'd entered, and I found Morgan, found out about Samantha Price, found the article about her death. You sent that article to Melissa. I thought she deserved to know, deserved to understand the danger she was in, but she didn't listen. She got angry at me for spying, for violating her privacy. She doubled down on the relationship. So I had to take more direct action. You planned to murder your wife and frame her lover. I planned to save her." Jonathan's voice rose to a shout. "Morgan Reeves is a killer. Killed Samantha Price and got away with it. I couldn't let the same thing happen to Melissa. I had to protect her. By strangling her in her own bedroom?" Jonathan's face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to go that way. I was going to confront Morgan when they showed up for their meeting. Prove to Melissa that Morgan was dangerous. Expose everything. But Morgan never came. And Melissa was there, locked in her room, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. And I realized she'd chosen this, chosen that life over our marriage, over everything we'd built. So you killed her." "I freed her," Jonathan whispered, "from the shame, from the exposure, from having to live with what she'd become. I did it quickly, mercifully. And then I waited in the ceiling, listening to you all try to figure out how it happened. It was almost beautiful, watching you chase the impossible solution when the truth was so simple." His lawyer finally succeeded in shutting him down, but it didn't matter. We had the confession on tape. We had the journal. We had the evidence. Jonathan Ashworth would spend the rest of his life in prison for murdering his wife. But as I watched him being led to a cell, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else, something he wasn't saying, some deeper truth hiding beneath the confession. It took me 3 more days to find it. Chapter 6. I couldn't let go of Samantha Price, the case that had ended Morgan Reeves's previous relationship, the death that had haunted them for 15 years, the accident that Jonathan Ashworth had weaponized. Something about it nagged at me, so I pulled the file, read the entire investigation from 15 years ago, and found discrepancies that the original detectives had missed or dismissed. Samantha Price had died of asphyxiation during what appeared to be consensual breath play with her partner, Morgan Reeves. But the medical examiner's report noted some unusual findings. Bruising patterns that didn't quite match the restraints used, petechial hemorrhaging that suggested longer oxygen deprivation than Morgan claimed, and trace evidence that had never been fully analyzed. I brought the case file to our current ME, Dr. Patricia Ward, and asked her to review it with modern forensic techniques. "This is interesting," Dr. Ward said, studying the autopsy photos. "The original ME ruled it accidental, but these bruise patterns are wrong. They're not consistent with the restraints Morgan described using. And look here. Finger marks on the throat, very faint, almost invisible in these old photos. But if I enhance them..." She worked her computer magic, bringing the old images into sharp relief. And there they were, fingerprints on Samantha Price's throat, clear enough to potentially match. "The killer strangled her first," Dr. Ward continued. then staged it to look like an accident with the BDSM equipment. Morgan probably found her already dead, panicked, tried to revive her, contaminated the scene. The original investigation assumed Morgan was the only person present, so they didn't look for anyone else. Can you pull prints from these photos? Possibly. The resolution isn't great, but I can try. It took 48 hours. But when Dr. Ward called me with the results, I felt the case crack open one final time. I got a match, she said. The fingerprints on Samantha Price's throat belonged to Jonathan Ashworth. The room spun. Jonathan had killed Samantha Price 15 years ago. He'd murdered Morgan's lover, staged it to look like a BDSM accident, and let Morgan take the blame. And then, 15 years later, when his own wife entered the same community and found the same partner, he'd done it again. But why? What connected Jonathan to Samantha? What had driven him to murder 15 years ago? I found the answer in Jonathan's college records. Samantha Price had attended the same university as Jonathan and Melissa. In fact, Samantha and Jonathan had dated briefly in their junior year, before Samantha broke up with him to explore her interest in BDSM and alternative relationships. Jonathan had watched his college girlfriend leave him for the BDSM community, and then years later, he'd watched his wife do the same thing. The pattern had repeated, and his need to protect them from their choices had turned to murder. Samantha had been his first victim, the one he'd gotten away with, the one that taught him he could kill and escape consequences if he planned carefully enough. And Melissa had been his second, the repetition of a crime he'd committed 15 years before, refined and perfected. But this time, he hadn't gotten away with it. When I confronted Jonathan with the evidence linking him to Samantha's murder, he didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled, a sad, terrible smile that held no remorse. Samantha was lost, he said softly, just like Melissa. They both chose degradation over love, chose strangers over people who actually cared about them. I tried to save Samantha first, tried to show her that her choices had consequences, but she wouldn't listen. So I stopped her. Stopped her from destroying herself. You murdered her. I freed her, just like I freed Melissa. And if I could do it again, I would. Because love means protecting people, even from themselves. It was the logic of a killer who believed himself a savior, the rationalization of someone who'd committed murder twice and felt justified both times. But there was one person who deserved to know the truth more than anyone else. Chapter 7. Morgan Reeves sat in my office, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I'd asked them to come in, said I had new information about Samantha Price's death. Now, watching Morgan's face as I explained what we'd discovered, I saw 15 years of guilt and grief finally begin to dissolve. Jonathan killed Samantha, Morgan whispered. All this time I blamed myself. I thought I'd made a mistake, miscalculated the breath play, been too rough. I've carried that guilt for 15 years, and it was murder. He staged it perfectly, I said. Made it look like an accident, knowing you'd be the obvious suspect as Samantha's dominant partner. You were investigated, cleared, but the suspicion never fully went away. That was his intention, to make you carry the blame. And then he did it again, with Melissa. Morgan's voice was hollow. He murdered the woman I loved and tried to frame me for it. Just like before. Except this time we caught him, And now we can reopen Samantha's case, clear your name officially, give her family the truth about what happened. Morgan was quiet for a long time. Then, very softly, "Will it bring them back, Samantha and Melissa?" "No, but it will give you the truth, and sometimes that's all we get." Morgan stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city that had witnessed so much tragedy. "Melissa and I had only 6 months together, but they were the most honest, most authentic months of my entire life. She saw me, really saw me, in ways no one else ever had. And I saw her. The real her, not the perfect society wife everyone else knew. We trusted each other with our most vulnerable selves. Until Jonathan poisoned that trust. No." Morgan turned back to me, and I saw something shift in their expression, from grief to anger to determination. "He tried to poison it. He sent that article hoping we'd fall apart. But Melissa and I would have worked through it. We were already talking, already planning to rebuild trust. Jonathan didn't destroy our relationship. He just ended it before we could heal." It was a subtle but important distinction. Jonathan had taken Melissa's life, but he hadn't taken the love Morgan felt for her, or the growth they'd experienced together. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Testify," Morgan said firmly. "At Jonathan's trial. I want to look him in the eye and tell him that he failed. Failed to break me 15 years ago. Failed to frame me this time. Failed to erase the beautiful thing Melissa and I built together. He thought he could control the narrative, control the investigation, control everything. But truth has a way of emerging, and it had. Through careful investigation, through refusing to accept easy answers, through questioning the impossible until it became possible. 3 months later, I sat in a courtroom and watched Morgan Reeves testify at Jonathan Ashworth's trial. The jury heard everything: the crawl space, the journal, the confession, and finally the evidence linking Jonathan to Samantha Price's murder 15 years earlier. The verdict took less than 4 hours. Guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. Jonathan showed no emotion as the sentence was read. 2 consecutive life terms, without possibility of parole. He'd spend the rest of his life in a cell, locked in just as surely as he'd locked his wife in that bedroom. But this time, there would be no hidden exit. No clever escape. No impossible mystery. Just justice. After the trial, Morgan and I stood outside the courthouse, watching media crews pack up their equipment. The case had attracted national attention: the locked room mystery, the BDSM angle, the twist of a husband framing his wife's lover for a murder he'd committed twice. "Thank you," Morgan said quietly, "for not giving up, for looking deeper, for seeing past the obvious suspect." "I was just doing my job." "No. You did more than that. You saw me as a person, not a stereotype. You questioned your assumptions. You followed the evidence instead of the easy narrative." Morgan paused, then added, "Melissa would have appreciated that. She spent her whole life being underestimated, being reduced to what people wanted to see. You saw the truth." I thought about that champagne glass, still clutched in Melissa's hand. About a woman who'd spent 8 years locked in a marriage of careful pretense before finally finding the courage to explore who she really was. About how that courage had gotten her killed by someone who claimed to love her. "I hope Melissa knew," I said, "in those last months with you, that she deserved to be seen, to be known." "She knew," Morgan said. "We made sure of that. Every scene, every conversation, every moment of trust. It was about being authentic, being real, That's what made it beautiful. 6 months after the trial, I received an invitation in the mail. Morgan had organized a memorial service for Melissa Ashworth, separate from the funeral her family had held. This one was for the Melissa they'd known, the woman who'd found freedom in surrender, strength in vulnerability, authenticity in exploration. I attended, along with dozens of others from the BDSM community who'd known Melissa during her journey of self-discovery. We gathered at the Sanctuary Club, where Melissa had first found the courage to ask questions, to challenge the life she'd been living, to imagine something different. Morgan spoke about love and loss, and the courage it takes to be yourself in a world that punishes authenticity. About how Melissa had taught them that it's never too late to start over, never too late to claim your truth, never too late to choose joy over obligation. Jonathan thought he could lock Melissa in a room and control her story, Morgan said to the gathered crowd. But we're here today to prove him wrong. We're here to remember the real Melissa, brave, curious, passionate, free. The Melissa who chose to live authentically even when it was dangerous, even when it cost her everything. We raised glasses of champagne in Melissa's honor. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental about justice. It's not just about solving crimes or locking up killers. It's about restoring truth, reclaiming narratives, refusing to let victims be defined by their deaths instead of their lives. Melissa Ashworth had lived 2 lives, the public persona of a society wife and the private reality of a woman discovering her authentic self. Jonathan had tried to erase the second life, to pretend it never existed, to reduce Melissa's story to a cautionary tale about the dangers of deviation. But we remembered, we testified, we refused to let him control the narrative. And in doing so, we gave Melissa the victory she deserved, the right to be remembered as she truly was, not as her killer wished her to be. As I drove home that evening, I thought about locked doors and the secrets they hide, about how we all have rooms we keep sealed, parts of ourselves we show only to those we trust completely, and about how violating that trust, whether through violence, betrayal, or forcing someone to be less than their authentic self, is perhaps the deepest sin of all. Jonathan Ashworth had spent years spying through cracks in the ceiling, watching his wife without her knowledge, judging her for choices he had no right to control. And when she refused to conform to his vision of who she should be, he'd killed her. But Melissa's story didn't end in that locked room. It ended here, in this memorial, surrounded by people who'd seen her truly and loved her completely, people who celebrated her courage instead of condemning her choices. That was her victory, her revenge on the man who tried to silence her. The truth, eventually, always finds a way out, even from behind locked doors, even from impossible rooms, even from graves. The case of Melissa Ashworth taught me that every investigation is really 2 investigations, one into the mechanics of murder and another into the truth of a life. We solved the first when we found Jonathan hiding in the ceiling, but we solved the second, the more important mystery, when we finally saw Melissa as she'd truly been. Not a victim, not a cautionary tale, not a society wife who'd made a fatal mistake, but a woman who'd found the courage to seek authenticity in a world that punished deviation. A woman who'd built trust with someone who saw her completely. A woman who'd chosen to live on her own terms, even when those terms scared her, even when they conflicted with everything she'd been taught, even when they put her in danger. Melissa Ashworth died in a locked room, but she lived in freedom, and no murderer, no matter how clever, could take that away from her. That's the thing about locked doors. They can keep people out or they can keep secrets in. But truth has a way of escaping eventually, through keyholes, through cracks, through the determination of people who refuse to accept easy answers. I keep a photo on my desk now, not of the crime scene, but of Melissa from the memorial service Morgan organized. She's laughing, fully alive, surrounded by people who understood her. It reminds me why I do this work. Not just to catch killers, but to restore truth, to give voice to the silenced, to solve the real mystery. Not how someone died, but how they lived. And Melissa Ashworth lived bravely, authentically, and on her own terms until the very end. That's the victory that matters. That's the justice worth fighting for. That's the truth that survives even the most carefully constructed locked room.